President Trump is in Asia this week, leaving behind a government shutdown and a demolition site at the White House. The East Wing has been torn down to make room for something Trump says he really wants, a new massive ballroom.
Sir, this is the White House. You're the President of the United States. You can do anything you want.
Trump earlier this month, what advisors told him about making this project happen. Joining me now is NPR senior political correspondent Mara Eliason. Good morning, Mara.
Good morning.
So before we get into the Asia trip, you saw the White House up close this week. What are you going to miss about the East Wing?
It was historic and beautiful and a magical place to enter for holiday parties or other events. But that clip you just played where Trump was talking to donors at dinner to thank them for the votes and make his ballroom dreams come true pretty much sums up President Trump's approach to power. He believes when you're president of the United States, you can do anything you want, and taking a wrecking ball to the White House to build a big, beautiful ballroom is what he wants to do.
Well, another thing that he wants is to finalize trade deals with Japan and South Korea this week and make a deal with China's leader, Xi Jinping. The two are set to meet at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in South Korea. How hard will it be for Trump to get this meeting with Xi?
It could be hard. This is the most high-stakes meeting Trump has had this term, with the potential to help the U.S. economy or make it worse. And China, as Trump might say, has a lot of cards, and they're playing them, holding up rare earth materials, not buying any soybeans from American farmers, and on his way to Asia on Air Force One, Trump told reporters, he said, they'll have to make concessions, and we will too. So that's the question. Which concessions will Trump make? Will he let China buy more advanced semiconductor chips, which some national security experts say would be dangerous? Or would he soften the U.S. stance towards Taiwan, saying the U.S. opposes Taiwan independence? He's already holding up a $400 million package to Taiwan. And what would he get in exchange from China? Would China agree to buy more soybeans? Would they release rare earth materials? Those are relatively low-cost concessions for China to make. So this is a big negotiation.
Trump has been focused on foreign relations lately, and he did something unexpected last week. He put sanctions on 2 Russian oil companies. What more can you tell us about why Trump decided to do this now?
He decided to do it because he had just gotten frustrated with Vladimir Putin. He said his talks with Putin don't go anywhere, and this is the first time in this term that he has done anything to pressure Russia other than rhetorically. Sanctions will hurt the Russian economy. They're not as powerful as Tomahawk missiles, though, which is what Ukraine wanted from the U.S., and President Trump appears to have ruled that out.
Mara, I wanted to ask you about the redistricting push President Trump kicked off this year by getting Texas to redraw its map to favor Republicans, but now it looks like Virginia lawmakers are holding a special session tomorrow to talk about redrawing its congressional maps to favor Democrats.
That's right. This all started with Texas. Now California Democrats are taking their redistricting plans to voters. Illinois and Maryland, 2 other blue states, are considering options to give Democrats more advantages. This follows successful Republican efforts to redraw maps in North Carolina and Missouri, and more red states are going to do the same. So all of this means that mid-decade redistricting or partisan gerrymandering could become a new normal, maybe every 2 years. And in this game, the Republicans have the advantage. They control more trifectas, that's governorships and state houses, and Republican voters are sprinkled more efficiently for electoral purposes throughout the heartland. Democratic voters are clustered inefficiently for the purposes of elections in urban areas, and they are just easier to gerrymander.
Okay, so and the other big thing is that today is the 26th day of the government shutdown. Still no movement or negotiations. This is now the second longest shutdown in U.S. history. What are your thoughts?
I have never covered a shutdown where both sides sincerely believe that they have the advantage. That can't be true. One of them is wrong. And polls show more voters do blame Republicans. They are the party in power. But Republicans are confident that they can pin this on the Democrats. And the question of where do we go from here, there is no more bipartisan center in Congress. There's no bipartisan Gang of 8 or Gang of 6 where conservative Democrats and moderate Republicans get together and work out a deal. The only solution is if President Trump calls Democrats to the White House, but he says he's not going to do that until they vote to open the government again.
That's NPR senior national political correspondent Mara Liasson. Thank you so much, Mara.
Thank you.
The Supreme Court's new term began this month after not too much of a summer vacation. Between the beginning of their break at the end of June and their October return, the 9 justices granted stays on lower court cases about whether President Trump can fire federal commissioners, about canceling health research grants and foreign aid funding, about immigration enforcement and the Voting Rights Act. The High Court did this entirely without writing opinions. And without explanations for those decisions, lower courts have been left unsure how to proceed. Now, cases surrounding Trump's deployment of troops to different cities are adding to the uncertainty. William Eskridge is a professor at Yale Law School, and he joins us now. Good morning.
Thank you very much.
We're talking about what's called an emergency shadow docket. How did that work for President Trump?
Well, the Supreme Court has long had an
I'm
emergency
giving you
docket
water. I don't know what your
for
problem is.
applications typically
I do
to stay
love you,
lower
though.
court
I
proceedings.
love you.
And before the current Trump administration, the shadow docket was used mainly for death penalty requests, and increasingly, starting with the Obama, Biden, and
This is
Trump
how you pick up a
administrations
baby.
earlier, for actions
Baby, look at this.
by lower courts blocking
It's a
presidential
baby. It's
initiatives
my baby.
and other
Oh.
executive actions.
Lays my
In the
kid.
last
Oh,
6
yeah, since
months,
day one, pal.
The shadow
You've
docket
been my girl,
exploded
Yep.
at a volume it had never seen.
That's why she's so attached to me.
What
dude.
impact have these
I raised her and I raised
decisions
fucking
made on the lower courts and
them.
how they operate?
Stop it.
Well, most of the lower court
Hi, they don't need to pick you up. You're too fucking heavy.
Trump administration
Your claws hurt.
have not.
All right, what are we doing?
On the other hand, there have
Knock it off.
at least 31.
What are we doing? Baby. Stop this with that. I am not making that right now. Please stop asking me. When I'm ready, I will make it.
And when you say emergency
Yeah,
relief,
don't go up.
allowing the president
Well, that's great. I got to figure it out how to make it. So
Correct. Emergency relief.
take that out of here. I don't want to hear your bullshit
Lower
video.
court
I don't.
injunctions.
lots of
You need to
lower
take the
court
pill, though. You
judges
give me your
have been
spoon.
speaking out about the use of the emergency docket. What are their concerns?
Come here.
The lower court concerns are several. The lower courts actually literally don't
Stop the
know
talkie.
what arguments the Supreme Court adopted to grant the stays.
I don't care. This
Lower
is your
court
mom. This is what
injunctions
Nana bought.
that are stayed by the U.S. Supreme Court
Hey, I remember when I got these first. All of them.
detailed factual
And she laughed at me. Oh, this is
detailed analysis of statutes
Hey, slow your roll, dude.
that the Trump administration is violating.
There. Take
And
it.
so there's a lot of concern that the Supreme Court is creating black holes in the law for an administration that has been accused of ignoring law, acting in
Make some
lawless
baskets.
ways, acting in ways
Don't hold.
executive will
You know, I'm getting
and
warm.
not legal obligations and duties statutes and the Constitution impose on the administration.
So what happens on the emergency docket, that
Or nice
is
people
considered
stay
like
on
a temporary thing,
Okay.
future arguments on the merits.
Hey, just put it in a fucking cup in there. Something
Do
like
you expect different outcomes when they hear the actual arguments in these cases? Or are we to expect if they granted relief and
Yeah,
allowed
before you get anything to drink, that's a great idea.
that they would like to rule in the
Be a damn good idea, young man.
actual argument?
Guess what? Hold that.
Well, most of the shadow docket emergency
No.
stays
Okay, get the fuck out of here. What are we doing?
by
Stand in the fucking ice.
grant of review.
Whoa,
Most of the
dude.
emergency stays
Sitting in.
simply say the district courts that are hearing these cases.
You don't need this stupid
Their
mug.
orders
Knock it
are
off.
put on hold.
Okay, you want something to drink?
Administration
Bring
then
what's in
continues to
here.
litigate for who knows how long.
Quit adding ice to
And then
it.
the stay remains in effect through appeal to the federal courts of appeals. And the stay remains in effect until the end of the litigation, which may come at the Supreme Court.
Well, don't
level,
stand there
but
and
may
look
not
at
come
it.
until
Let's
the
keep
end of
staring
the
at it.
circuit court evaluation. So there's
Okay,
no
we'll clean it up
guarantee
instead
that
of
the
standing there
Supreme Court
going
will ever take review of
like
these
you're
cases.
dumbfounded. Like,
And the stays
I've
might
never
remain
seen
in
that
effect,
before.
conceivably even throughout the duration of the second Trump administration.
Is there any way to curb the use of the emergency docket?
How are you wasting
Conceivably through some kind of
Fucking pour
action
that in
by
my
Congress. But that is unlikely
Christopher,
because any
here.
kind of statute
Good
could be
water.
vetoed by President Trump if Congress
man. Sit
even
down, young
bestirred
man.
itself
Now.
to pass such a statute.
Wipe everything up and sit
The
down.
main response to a situation where concerned Americans believe that the executive is acting in a lawless way is continue to sue and continue to produce factual arguments and proof that the administration is acting outside of the law. Most of the injunctions issued by district courts against the Trump administration, pushing pause on arguably illegal or lawless actions, have not reached the Supreme Court's emergency docket. And of course, some of the decisions will be ultimately ruled by the U.S. Supreme Court. It's unlikely that the 6 Republican justices will rule against the Republican president, but in some cases, presumably they will.
That's William Eskridge. He's a professor at Yale Law School. Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
The peanut butter.
Cool. Totally rad.
This message comes from Vital Farms, who works with small American
Well,
farms
Bridge,
to
I know
bring
you
you
can't handle
pasture-raised
tomato
eggs.
soup
Click
like
the
that.
play button to hear from
Well, you
pasture-raised
can.
egg farmer
I just didn't
Tanner
add
Reese,
enough.
who shares the sights
It was
and sounds
condensed.
he and his hens experience on the rolling hills of his
Well, you know, I
family
don't
farm
make
in
tomato
southern
soup like
Missouri.
that. I don't buy shit
War
like
is
that.
shutting off global sales
If I don't know how to
of
make it,
many
I'm not
US
gonna buy
grown
it.
crops,
Your mom
just
goes
as
and buys
his
shit that
tariffs
she
have
thinks she
made
knows how to
imported
make.
fertilizer
Serious?
and other
You know
products
how to
needed
make
by
it, you're
farmers
fucked.
more expensive.
Or buy stuff
Many
you
of
don't
these
have to
growers are being pushed to the brink of
make. I'm buying
bankruptcy.
shit that I
But
don't.
one company in Oregon is thriving thanks to growing interest in craft flour. NPR's Kurt Sigler has this report from Umatilla Indian Reservation.
Thunderstorms darken the huge skies as a crowd of dozens of people retreat under tents erected on the stubble of a wheat field. The weather isn't dampening spirits.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Here is a celebration of some rare good news lately in the Pacific Northwest wheat country. The price of wheat is the lowest it's been in 5 years. Many farmers are barely hanging on and struggling to get loans. But here, construction has begun on a new craft flour mill.
So I have to rip it, get
It'll
apart,
give
and fucking do
farmers
all
a
that.
local market for their hard
It's
red
like a
winter
constant thing.
wheat coated
If I'm
by
not doing dishes,
artisan
I'm
bread
fucking doing your
makers.
guys' laundry. If I'm
Stephen
not
Hart
doing that,
is beaming.
I'm
For
clean.
small communities in rural
It's like I'm
areas,
some fucking.
this is like
Get out of there.
Hart is a trustee with the
We're picking up
Confederated
dog shit or
Tribes of
cleaning up dog
Umatilla
piss.
Indian
Or other
Reservation.
humans.
The promise of 20 new living wage
how I
jobs is a
feel.
big deal. The tribe helped finance the mill owned by Washington State-based Karen Springs.
Want some ice
It's
now?
providing the land for it near its casino.
growing up here, that was our
There you
backbone
go.
of it. Money was just from the casino, and we're like, we need more, we need more than just this casino.
Most tribal members, there are about 400 living here locally, don't farm themselves. They lease their tribal land to non-Indian wheat farmers who ship
Still
their
got water?
harvests down the Columbia River for export, mostly to Asia.
It's good water.
Now, it's a system that's more or less been in place since the first Russian wheat farmers came to the Pacific Northwest in the
Yeah.
1890s.
We paid $2
Bobby
for
Connor is the
the
tribe's cultural director.
And for many families,
Black
for a very
Panther and
long
this guy,
time,
and
that
Black
was the
Panther got chewed up.
only
His fucking
reliable
things got
source
chewed
of
off.
income.
New mill
He's
is
stubby.
promising to give priority
Hold
to
on,
training and
man,
hiring to native
they're gonna
people,
quit making
so
this
that's
stuff.
huge for Connor. But as a historian, she's also focused
She
on
doesn't
the
believe
bigger
it.
picture, healthier,
They
locally
won't quit
grown
making it.
food
Don't matter.
staying
Black
here,
Panther, Black
how
Panther.
it
Don't
used to
matter
be.
if that dude
I
died. That was
watch
the
crops
thing.
leave
The
the
role of Black
valleys of
Panther.
my homeland for ports of call all over the world, including these salmon that leave our rivers and travel 3 to 5 years in the Pacific Rim. They make their way home.
Yeah,
The
see,
other
it's
crops
looking nice
don't.
right now.
The crops sold overseas
more
have
dressed
brought
up.
in a lot of money to
The
this
access
area.
water,
But two trade wars in the last decade have upended that economy. So a local mill set to expand its production.
I wish you could
That's
make
big. Maybe just as big as the story about much needed
Stop
outside investment coming
with the
into a
bullshit.
remote reservation.
When I'm fucking dancing and ready, I'll make it. You understand?
President Trump's tariffs have many farmers here worried they're
You had a
losing
bowl of cereal this
long-standing trade deals with Asian businesses.
That's not my fault.
Politics and volatility
Stop
in the
eating
West
so damn
today.
much.
80 to 90% of the
Dude,
wheat
all you do
grown
is eat.
in Washington and Oregon is
Fisher,
export.
throw that
This
shit
is
away.
the owner of Karen Spring Mills, Kevin Morris, back at the construction site.
And we're trying to do our little part and change that because the commodity market's unpredictable. It's usually a race to the bottom and not profitable.
In years like this, when there's also a global surplus of wheat, Morris says the U.S.
Hey,
government
that ice
effectively
melting.
subsidizes wheat farmers via crop insurance programs. And that's one of the only things that keeps farmers breaking even.
We're trying to provide a domestic high value market that the farmers can depend on.
Once at full production, Morse says the mill will need 2 million bushels of wheat a year. Now that's still a blip when you consider the Northwest pumps out upwards of 150 million bushels a year. In nearby Walla Walla, Washington, Byron Beanie is a buyer for the Northwest Grain Growers Cooperative.
Everything pretty much flows down to Portland, so to really change that, you'd have to have a major shift in milling operations.
Beanie says craft flour is still a niche product. Then again, so is craft beer back in the day. The wheat farmers who will supply the new mill are themselves niche in the big commodity market. They do what's called regenerative farming, a smaller scale, more conservation-minded method with less tillage. It's also more expensive.
Come on, Chris, move your ass. Move your
Keith
cup.
Porter switched over to the practice a few years ago. Some of his neighbors watched with skepticism that's now turning to curiosity because he was able to ink a deal to help supply the local craft flour mill. Many others are struggling to even get financing to plant for next year right now due to the brutal market.
That uncertainty is a big deal. So when you go to the bank and you don't have a for sure market for an operating loan, then I can go to my banker and say, well, Karen Springs Mills will take 60,000 bushel from you this year.
That's not hyperbole to say that the new craft mill could allow Porter to pass on the family farm to his kids. That's becoming a rare thing in rural America today. People are ready for a win. Bobby Connor, the Cayuse, Umatilla, and Walla Walla Tribes cultural director, says an outside company investing big here is a signal that Indian country is open for business.
Our economic recovery has been 180 years in the making.
The new mill is scheduled to open within a year. Kirk Ziegler, NPR News, Pendleton, Oregon.
Jackson is an icon of the civil rights movement and a protege of Martin Luther King Jr. But he was also a politician whose groundbreaking campaigns in the 1980s would eventually pave the way for the first black U.S. President, Barack Obama. Here's Jackson addressing the Democrats during his 1988 presidential campaign.
Support economic development. You know it's right. Be consistent and gain our moral authority in the world. I challenge you tonight, my friends. Let's be bigger and better as a nation and as a party.
A new book by CNN anchor Abby Phillip charts Jackson's rise and his political legacy. It's called A Dream Deferred, Jesse Jackson and the Fight for Black Political Power. Abby Phillip joins us now. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Aisha.
So this book looks at how Jesse Jackson became one of the most powerful and influential black politicians of his time. But a lot has changed. What made you want to explore that now?
It's exactly for that reason that I wrote this book, because a lot of people think of Reverend Jackson today as a civil rights leader, as an activist, and they kind of skip completely over this extraordinary chapter when he was, as you put it, one of the most powerful, if not the most influential and powerful black figures in politics. And that chapter of his very long life as a public figure, even at the time that he was running, was not very well understood. He was viewed as something of a kind of gadfly type of figure, somebody who was running to make a point. But it was only until decades later that it really became clear how prescient he was, both on the issues and also in terms of the rule changes that he ushered in that allowed for, most notably, Barack Obama to become the Democratic nominee in 2008.
You know, what you get from the book is how extraordinary Jesse Jackson's rise was. I mean, from the Jim Crow South, and I didn't realize that Jackson had this complicated father relationship. He was raised by his stepfather, but his birth father was this prominent neighbor of his who was married and had a whole other family. Mm-hmm. How did that complicated dynamic affect Jackson?
He was a man in search of a father, and that's partly how he ended up in the orbit of Dr. King. You know, when I spoke to Ambassador Andy Young, who was Dr. King's closest aide, he said, you know, when Jesse Jackson came into the circle, he wanted both King and Young to be father figures to him, even though they were just a few years older than him. They weren't old enough to be his father.
Yeah.
But he was a man sort of yearning for that kind of connection, that mentorship, and a sense of purpose.
Eventually, there comes a point where it's run, Jesse, run. Jackson does run in 1984, but he's really hurt by claims of like anti-Semitism and his use of this derogatory term for Jewish people. What do you think he learned from that initial campaign that set him up for 1988?
I think that the 84 campaign surprised even him in the sense that it resonated, that he was able to get millions of voters. He was starting to get the interest of white voters, that there was something about what he was arguing for, which is basically core populism at its heart, which is essentially that the working people need to unite together in an agenda against a government and an economic system that benefits the wealthy and the powerful. What he didn't take away was that politics is very different from being a moral leader, a religious leader, or an activist. And his ties to figures like Louis Farrakhan, the Nation of Islam leader, were devastating for him. Farrakhan was a constant presence in the 1984 campaign, creating negative headlines and reinforcing this perception that Jesse Jackson was anti-Semitic. And Jackson did not want to denounce people, just in general. And when I spoke to people around him, I just kept asking them why. And a lot of people said it's because of his belief that you don't abandon anybody. And politicians, frankly, wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
And I think Jesse Jackson hadn't really learned. In fact, maybe he didn't even want to be a politician in that respect.
What could modern movements like Black Lives Matter, etc., learn from Jackson, especially with the current attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Jackson is a student of the civil rights movement, and so he was focused not just on the message, but also on the strategy and using the political system as a means to an end. And I do think that, in a way, the political movements, perhaps like Black Lives Matter and others, the activist movements, I should call them today, have figured out the protest part of it, but never really figured out the power part of it. And I do think that is a core lesson of Jesse Jackson's, his own personal move from activism to actually figuring out how to operate within the political system, to put people in power that can execute on those goals. And we haven't seen that happen, which is one of the reasons why it seems that the backlash is winning, frankly, to the sort of movement of the 2020s, where there was this big conversation about race in America. But it's also fair to say that this cycle of protest and reform and then backlash is a normal American cycle. And even in those cycles of backlash, which also existed in the 1970s and the 1980s at this exact time that Jackson was running, those backlash cycles do happen and there are setbacks. And even still, that doesn't mean that the story is over.
That's Abby Phillip. She's the host of CNN's Newsnight with Abby Phillip and the author of A Dream Deferred, Jesse Jackson and the Fight for Black Political Power. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for this. I appreciate it.
Hey, NPR listeners. Each year, NPR invites students from around the country to submit their audio stories to NPR's Student Podcast Challenge. Click to learn more and listen to stories from recent winners. Support for NPR and the Student Podcast Challenge come from Progressive Insurance. Get a quote online at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates.
A musher usually drives a team of sled dogs across a thick blanket of snow. But a growing number of racers are finding that it's just as fun without the wintry weather. There's been a world championship for dryland mushing for 20 years. And for the first time, it's in the U.S. Katie Thorson from member station WXPR reports.
The first International Dryland Mushing World Championship was held in 2002 in Italy. And this week, more than 350 competitors from 23 countries are racing in northern Wisconsin with the hopes of becoming a world champion. In dryland mushing, dogs are hooked up to bikes, scooters, three-wheeled carts, or even a person and run on dirt trails.
This one.
One competitor, Andre Boyson Hillestad, had just finished one race. He has been competing in dryland mushing since he was 13.
It's fun, it goes fast, and you have to be a little bit crazy in the head.
The now 23-year-old traveled from Norway to race his dogs in the 1- and 2-dog scooter races.
It's fun, and it's quite an experience.
Destiny Keel of Michigan says that's been the reaction from a lot of the international mushers. Keel is the sponsorship fundraiser chair for the U.S. Federation of Sled Dog Sports.
And we've had so many compliments on the trail, the trees, and the hospitality here in Wisconsin that it makes us proud.
Keel's been mushing for 23 years. This is her first time competing in the Dryland World Championship. 4 of her dogs pulled her on her 3-wheel cart.
I love the bond that I create with my dogs. They're my teammates. We do everything together from eat, sleep, train. What I do, they do.
The excitement is palpable at the start of another race. The 4 dogs are ready. Handlers hold the dogs in place so they don't jump the start. When the countdown reaches 0, the barks fade and they're off.
You're so in tune with your dog. It's almost like tunnel vision when you're out there. You're so focused. It's hard to notice anything else out there.
Wisconsin's Nina Baum competed in her first Dryland World Championship in 2019 in Sweden.
And I was completely blown away, and I was just like, we have to do this in the U.S.
As a U.S. Federation board member, Baum and others with the organization work to bring the Dryland World Championships to the U.S. This week, she competed in the 1-dog scooter race with Dusty, her sister's large Eurohound, an Alaskan Husky and pointing breed crossbreed typically groomed for the sport.
It's really key to have the extra power and strength, especially on a hilly course like this. He's also really fast, so he's the perfect 1-dog scooter dog.
Baum was 6 years old when she started dog sledding on snow. By the time she was 12, she was mushing on dry land.
I love that, I can continue to be out on the trail with my dogs outside of the winter season. Expands the time that I can be with them doing this.
And as racers compete on this last day for a spot on the podium, Baum and other organizers say they already have their victory, bringing the World Championship to the U.S.
So it is really a historic moment.
And a celebration, as the International Federation puts it, of sport, dogs, and the great outdoors. For NPR News, I'm Katie Thorson in Minocqua, Wisconsin.